initiative in an, an initiative in North Carolina titled the North Carolina Woods for Wildlife Conservation Initiative. Um, get the slide to flip. Before I begin getting into the initiative, I want to give you all a background on who I am. Um, I am a farm bill biologist working for Quail Forever. As a farm bill biologist, I provide wildlife management advice to landowners in North Carolina. I do this by writing management recommendations that help them improve wildlife populations on their property. Whenever I visit with a landowner, we discuss goals and objectives for what they have for their property, and we improve the wildlife that's found on their property through habitat management and improvement. In addition to visiting with these landowners, I participate and conduct in outreach events that educate private landowners in wildlife management in events and webinars like this. In addition, I assist state, federal, and non-government organizations or NGOs wherever needed. This initiative has a lot of partnerships, which I help with whenever I can. In addition to this, I also work in an NRCS office, the Natural Resource Conservation Service, and can help landowners with cost share assistance whenever their goals and objectives align with that cost share assistance that is available. So getting into the North Carolina Woods for Wildlife Conservation Initiative, what it is a project that's partially funded by the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation through a grant. Through that grant administered through the North Carolina Forest Service, in agreements with different partners. Positions like mine, being the Quail Forever biologist, are hired to help landowners in the southeastern portion of North Carolina. The purpose of this initiative is to increase the capacity for partner coordination to help those private landowners have access to technical assistance to improve habitat on their property. And the why behind this initiative is because of the importance of wildlife in southeastern North Carolina. Some of the most diverse ecosystems are found in the southeastern part of North Carolina in longleaf pine ecosystems, which is what we primarily focus on through this initiative, as well as bottomland hardwoods. Another big reason for why this initiative is important is because of the timber importance in North Carolina. And in the Southeast in general. In the southeastern portion of the United States, it's referred to as the wood basket, contributing 1.1 million jobs and $230 billion in regional economy. Because of the importance between wildlife and timber, and then because the majority of land, around 90%, is privately held in the Southeast, it makes it very important to have technical assistance available to landowners to meet these wildlife and timber objectives. So the overview of this project, like I said, we engage with woodland owners and forest management, enhancing habitat in both longleaf and bottomland hardwoods. In addition to enhancing habitat in these two ecosystem types, we also do farm certifications. North Carolina Tree Farm is a partner. There's cost share assistance available to certify your farm as a certified tree farm. You can see there Leslie McCormick is in charge of that program. Her phone number and email are there. And if you need that information, you can also get up with me after this webinar. The location of this initiative, like I said, is in the southeastern portion of North Carolina, from Moore County down to the coast, up towards Harnett and Onslow County. You can see there shaded in with the green counties. The partners that I have been talking about is the North Carolina Forest Service, which is who this grant is administered through. I've helped the North Carolina Forest Service with technical assistance with landowners, a North Carolina Tree Farm with farm certifications, Quail Forever, myself being in this position, Audubon, North Carolina, which we have a speaker from today, help with the technical assistance to landowners and habitat management plans, as well as the National Wild Turkey Federation, the NGOs there. And then the state agency, the North Carolina Wildlife Resource Commission, helping out their technical assistance biologist whenever I can. And then the federal agency, U.S. Fish and Wildlife. So to implement this conservation initiative, we go on site visits. You can see there in some pictures. The top left picture is a landowner that's planted 130 some acres of native warm season grasses. There's some hardwood control in the bottom picture, and then we also do a lot of prescribed burning, which in the top right picture is planned to be burned this upcoming December. I mean, we do all these practices through a lot of farm bill programs that help these landowners get paid. The other portion is the outreach. We've held workshops in the past in person for both landowners and resource professionals, as well as getting out in the field and showing some examples of good habitat management. Accomplishments to date, we've improved 695 acres of bottomlands. We've done almost 14,000 acres of prescribed burn under longleaf pine. Other than prescribed burning, there's about 3,600 acres of improved longleaf habitat. We've restored about 6,700 acres of longleaf pine. And then the accomplishment that I think is most important, with this initiative, with everyone involved, we've assisted 243 woodland owners, which is the overall purpose of this initiative, is to get out there with the landowner and make sure that their goals and objectives are being met for their land. My contact information is there in the bottom left, my phone number and email. If you have any questions about the initiative or what the initiative can do for you or what it might mean to you as a landowner or as a resource professional, please don't hesitate to give me a call after this webinar, and I'll be glad to answer any questions that you have. And at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Benji Strope with the North Carolina Wildlife Resource Commission. Thank you.
Okay, can y'all see my screen?
Yes.
All right. Thanks everybody for joining us today. Again, I'm Benji Strope, Cure Management Biologist with the Wildlife Resources Commission. And I run the Corporate Cure program, have done that since 2006. And that's just the commission's, one of the private lands programs, projects to put early successional habitat. In this case, with the Cure program, we do that on commercial swine farms in southeastern North Carolina. So we do a lot of field borders, native grass plant and pollinator stuff, longleaf and timber management. And along with that, we use a lot of herbicides. So I will put a disclaimer out now that I am not a chemist, and neither I nor the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission endorses any particular names or products that I'm about to show you. So anyway, the title of this program is Commonly Used Herbicides for Habitat Management. So before you even start, when you're doing your habitat management, there are some questions you should want to ask yourself. Is A, do you need a license or certification? Have you read or understood the herbicide label? Do you have the necessary personal protective equipment, such as gloves, safety eyewear, shoes, socks, pants, long sleeve? Is the weather okay? Is the timing right for using these herbicides? Do you know what the target vegetation is? And is your equipment that you're going to use is calibrated and you have a measuring cup? For obvious reasons, you don't want to put out too much chemical and potentially be in violation of the label. And then on the inverse of that, if you're not putting out enough, you're not going to get the results that you want. So just real quick, for certification stuff, again, this is North Carolina based. If you're aerial or dealer, you're going to need a license. If you're getting paid to do it, if you're like me and a government employee, or if you're a landowner using restricted use pesticides, then you need to have a license to apply them. And the link right there, agr.gov, you can find out more about that if you wish. Labels, if you've been to any herbicide class or pesticide class, you're going to get this hammered on you that labels are the law, and that is indeed what it is. But the labels have all the information you need on the active ingredient. The signal word is actually, I don't know if you can see my mouse there or not, but right there, it's either going to be caution, warning, or danger based on toxicity. The label is going to tell you about the safety equipment that you need, and as well as how to mix and use the product. One of my links that I use frequently and often, if I'm researching a herbicide or need just a copy of the label, you can go to cdms.net with that link right there. And they have labels on about every chemical known to man for sale. And I think there's a few other sites that have that as well. So weather and time, again, you need to follow the label. Better results are applied when the plants are small and actively growing for the most part. I do a lot of tree control in my job, so the best time for that is in the early summer before the leaves harden off, or in the fall, say September, when the sap's starting to go down the trees or go back down into the roots. And some chemicals, and we'll talk about this in a minute, they don't work as well when it's hot. So again, you need to make sure that your timing is right. We have numerous application methods for applying herbicides. You got backpack sprayers and handheld pump sprayers, which are great for small areas and doing basal bark applications. You got like 25-gallon sprayers for like ATVs, which we use frequently and often on treating field borders and fallow areas. 50+ gallon tanks for doing whole fields or doing woodlands. You can use wick bars or hack and squirt method. Typically, when you're mixing, you're going to do half full of water, add your herbicide, add your surfactant, and finish your fill. I guess I should say, before you add your surfactant, start agitating your tank. Then you can add your surfactants and finish filling the tank. And that applies to most herbicides. So these is a picture of the tanks that I use. Got my 50-gallon UTV tank, a handheld, a backpack, and a 25-gallon ATV. With either the ATV or this one, I can add boomless nozzles in case I don't want to use the wands, or if I'm spraying bigger areas. And I also have you can just barely see it sitting here, is a 15-foot boom nozzle that folds up. So, and then they also double as fire suppression when we're doing burning, just as a water tank. So the herbicides that I most commonly use, I got listed here with some brand name examples, Triclopyr 3 or 4. Common names of those: Garlon, Element, Triclopyr. We usually use the Triclopyr 3 or 3A, which is an aquatic, if I'm spraying near a ditch bank or a ditch that has a lot of water in it. But for the most part, I use Triclopyr 4. Again, when it comes to it is a broadleaf killer and it's post, but when it comes to the brand names and examples, there's over 200 products with Triclopyr in it. So obviously, I'm not going to name all those. And I'm sure everybody has heard of the next one, glyphosate. There's over 750 products for sale in the United States with glyphosate in it. Roundup probably being the most common, but you got Ranger Pro, Honcho, Mad Dog. There's a whole slew of them. And that will work on grasses, broadleaves, and it's. We also have Imazapyr, commonly known as Arsenal or Polaris, and most commonly used in woodland applications. We also have Imazapic, which is used when we're doing native grasses and pollinator plants, and common names or common examples of that's plateau or panoramic. We also use 2,4-D some, which is a broadleaf killer, and there is a slew of those. Now, 2,4-D can be either an amine or an ester. The esters just volatilize a lot more quickly than the amines do, but they are better penetrating the waxy layer on leaves. You got surfactants. What a surfactant is just it's either a wetting or sticking agent. Most labels require or recommend what you use with them. A lot of the glyphosates today already have that in it, but there are other examples of surfactants are 80-20 non-ionic, methylated seed oil. And then what I frequently use are the penetrating surfactants like Phase, Sunrise, Psychic 2, or LI 700. But what they do is they help reduce the surface tension of the water droplet to make the water wetter, as they like to say, or makes the water droplet a little bit flatter. Thus, you'll get more herbicide in contact with the leaf. So we do a lot of spot treating of woody brush in the field borders and in fallow areas that I manage. Typical mix, early spring up until, well, from leaf out until about mid-June, late June, depending the temperature. I'll use a 2% triclopyr mix with a penetrating surfactant at 3 ounces per gallon. Once it gets really hot, I will bump that up to 2.5%. And again, if I'm spring next to a wet area, I'll use a triclopyr 3. If I'm out in a fairly drier area, then I'll use the triclopyr 4. You want to spray to wet, not to run off. Obviously, if it runs off, it's not going to do any good. Then on wild pines, you can use a 5% glyphosate. You're going to want to try to squeeze, tighten down on the nozzle tip a little bit and make it as misty as you can. Make the spray come out like a mist and try to cover every needle, and that will give you good results on controlling wild pines. But again, if you don't hit every needle, you're not going to get the result that you want. Base of bark, this has become one of my favorites. We do a lot of this in our longleaf areas. You can use a backpack sprayer or a handheld. You need to have a good quality product there, or a good backpack or a good handheld with Vitin seals or chemical resistant seals, or else they'll leak or they won't last very long. So guess what I'm saying is your $15 cheapie from the hardware store is probably not going to last very long if you're doing much of this. But you can do this any time of year, even if it's raining, unless the ground is flooded. But it's a 20 or 25% triclopyr 4 with an oil such as diesel or kerosene, or you can even buy commercial oils for it. You can also use a Mazapyr as well. But you're going to spray that 8 to 12 inches at the bottom of the tree. And this is either a maple or a loblolly bay here in this picture. But you can see that dark spot here where you just spray it on one side, and it should, with osmosis, it'll start running around the tree. But a tree this size is probably 3 to 4 inches. I'd come to the other side and spray it again. Then within about 20 minutes, that dark spot should completely encircle the tree, and then it'll be dead. The neat part with this stuff is too, with the base of bark, you can also do pines at about 4 feet. So instead of spraying down here at the ground level, you're going to spray up here at the top. And again, if it's a smaller stem, you just spray it one time and it should circle around the tree. If not, hit it from both sides and that pine is dead and gone. Hoe fields, this is typically we use glyphosate at 2 quarts to the acre. If we're going to do preparation for any native grass plantings, we'll usually do 2 applications preferably, or if you even got more time than that, it'd be great to do like a Roundup ready crop even before that. And I will, if I'm planting forbs with it, I will use a Mazapic with 12 ounces to the acre or less in that mix. Now, there are some problem plants here in coastal Carolina. Bermuda grass will need multiple applications of 2.5 to 5% glyphosate. Or you can try spraying it one time in the summer with 24 ounces of Imazapyr, more commonly known as Arsenal AC, with 1 quart of methylated seed oil. Now, Imazapyr is a pre-emergent, so it's going to stay in the soil for 3 to 6 months, so you need to be aware of that. But you could potentially, if you were planning on had a Bermuda field, spray it with Arsenal this summer, spray it again next spring with glyphosate, and then you could go ahead and do your native planting. We also have pigweed, which is also, it's resistant to the ALS inhibitors such as glyphosate. So you could try 2,4-D or one of the triclopyrs, since it is a broadleaf, or you just may have to do it the hard way and pull it out by hand. We also do a lot of timber stuff going on around here. So prep mid-story treatments. Normally going to want 1 to 2 quarts triclopyr, 24 to 48 ounces with 8 ounces of surfactant in a 25-gallon mix. That's going to be plus or minus depending on what's out there. If you're going to plan on burning it, you definitely don't want to kill the fine fuels such as your grass. This work's usually done by a skidder, helicopter, or hand crews. But if you're doing something like this, get a consult from either your Forest Service or the people that are potentially bidding on the work or a consulting forester. Hack and squirt. This is probably my least favorite way to apply herbicides. It's very labor intensive. This is just where you use a machete or a hatchet to make angled cuts around a tree, then use a squirt bottle to apply full strength chemicals such as glyphosate into the cut that you made. If you look to these pines here in the photo, you can see where they're browning up at the top. These were encroaching in on one of my fallow areas. So me and my temporary went in there. You got to fight your way into the trunk, then make the cuts, and then make the spray. Just if you ever see something that says apply 1 milliliter into the cut, your typical spray bottle that you can buy at a hardware store that will handle chemicals, if you do 1 full squirt, that is 1 milliliter of spray. You can also buy products called a hypo hatchet or tree injectors. But again, if you got to fight your way to get into the trunk to apply them, it's definitely a lot of work. But if you've got an open ground story or where you can get to the trunk, then these would probably be worth having. Cut stump. We've done a lot of this in our longleaf areas where we get a bunch of loblollies or small maples coming up in amongst the longleaf. But take your brush saw or your chainsaw, cut down the tree that you don't want. Spray the cambium with full strength glyphosate. The cambium is just that outer ring just inside the bark. That way it will keep it from resprouting. And yes, small loblolly pines will resprout. So if they have 6 inches or less at the base where you cut it, then you need to spray them. You also need to spray them within probably 20 to 30 minutes, maybe 45, or else that sap will start rising up out and it won't let the herbicide into the plant. I would recommend, like you see, there's my squirt bottle there. We do add a little bit of water to that just to thin it down, makes it come out of the squirt bottle a little bit easier, and then it doesn't clog up near as much. And again, that's also fairly labor intensive. Wick bar, they used to sing their praises about these things whenever field borders became popular, but they never really took off. They work, but they're not the greatest thing. I do use them to control duck fennel in some of my field borders, but you use them to protect your ground level species. It's as the name says, put your chemical in here and then give it some time, and these wicks will start collecting up the herbicide. If you let it sit there too long, it'll actually drip a little bit. But I use about a 75% glyphosate mix in the tube. So that's 1 quart water, 3 quarts glyphosate. Just pour it in there. What I have found that really helps with this is we'll take an air tank and put up here and run it into the vent tube and give it a blast of air to pressurize that a little bit, and it helps speed up the herbicide coming out, particularly once you get going. Running over your target. And you do want to run over your target in multiple directions or opposite directions. That way you're getting good coverage on the plant. And just for a safety note, if you're running it over, you're also getting chemical all over your machine as well. But they do make these wick bars from a handheld wand to anything that you can mount on a tractor. You do use hexazinone some, which is either Velpar or power pellets. You can see the picture of power pellets right there. I'll use them not so much for controlling oaks, but for controlling privet. That's a weather-based thing or early spring thing. You need to put those out right before they start leafing out. And you put the number of pellets there based on the size of the trunk. And I think it's 1 pellet per inch of trunk diameter. But that will also work on many broadleaf weeds, shrubs, and some grasses as well. If you're looking to control a bigger area, then you would put them out in a grid pattern, just the pellets. Or if you buy just the Velpar, that is a dry flowable that you can mix with water, and then you can put it out with a spot gun, which I don't know if y'all can see this, but this is a spot gun, and that will put out whatever you set it to, like 1 milliliter per blast of the trigger. Just some general notes. Herbicides in the box stores are usually not the same strength as what you get in the 2.5 gallon jug from commercial providers. If you buy a 2.5 gallon jug of glyphosate, it's going to be 41%. But if you go buy a quart bottle at Lowe's or Home Depot or wherever, it's probably only going to be somewhere around 20%. And that works with triclopirs and stuff as well. The 2,4-Ds and the triclopirs do not work as well when it gets above 85, 90 degrees. So that is one thing to take into account, especially here in coastal North Carolina when it does get that hot and it gets so hot as it does here in the summer. As I mentioned, most of the glyphosates have surfactants in them, and that's usually a full surfactant load. So you get a lot of foam whenever you're mixing this stuff. So get the foamer and use that. Just put a squirt in while it's agitating and keep squirting it in until your foam is all gone. It also makes a big difference when you're cleaning out the tanks. And it's always a good idea to clean your tanks or use tank cleaners, which are commercially available between different mixes or before storing your sprayers. You also want to keep your stuff fairly clean. There's no point in dragging chemicals around when you don't have to, but triple rinse your empty the jugs and empty them into your spray tank. I triple rinse my spray tanks out and then put the rinseate either where I was spraying or on fire breaks just to help keep them in check. If you have any mixes that you're going to save, make sure you label it, because I guarantee you're going to forget in about 3 months what you had in that jug. Always a good idea to offer the empties up for recycling. If you've got extra chemicals or chemicals you're not used or chemicals you're not sure of what it is, most of the county cooperative extensions around here usually have one day a year where they will take those unused herbicides. And it's always a good idea to keep records, the amount of chemical and surfactant that you put out, what was the weather conditions, what was the target species, and what did you even use to put it out with. If you ever try to do any warranty stuff with some of these chemicals, then you would need that information. And you also have to have that information if you're doing restricted use pesticides. So some other sources, your North Carolina Forest Service, Cooperative Extension, all the major chemical companies have herbicide representatives that are happy to help you with any questions. And of course, the internet's always a decent resource for the most part. And then the North Carolina Agricultural Chemical Manual has a lot of information. I think it covers probably every chemical that is available for sale in North Carolina. And there's my contact information if anybody has any questions for after this. But anyway, appreciate it. Stay safe. Am I supposed to answer these?
No, I'm good, Benji. Sorry, it took me a second. Great job, Benji. Thanks for all that information.
Do I need to answer my questions now, or are we saving that until the end?
We're going to save that till the very end after Amy gets done with hers, and then we'll go through and answer those.
All right.
Okay, great. So yes, I've enjoyed working with Benji on some of my projects, and it was great to have him speak today. So thanks for joining me. After Benji, I'm Amy Tomcho. I'm a conservation biologist for Audubon, North Carolina, and I'm going to be talking about forestry for birds today. Forests and birds inherently go together. And, you know, we're looking at research now that indicates that we've lost about 3 billion birds across North America in the last 50 years. So we're creeping up to that 30% population loss mark, and we just can't ignore those data anymore. So the majority of my work has focused on private lands for the last 7 years or so. And I know firsthand that we must find a balance for both birds and people as we continue to face economic challenges and challenges of trying to keep that legacy forest intact across the state. So I believe that part of that solution is forestry for birds. And the principles that we'll talk about today can work on family land, public land, industrial forest, and really any tract of trees whose ownership is engaged in either rotational timber management or forest preservation. And birds are becoming increasingly popular. They're a topic of conversation between people who aren't just birders. And so one thing that I hope that you'll walk away with knowing today is the complex relationship between birds and forests, and the fact that it's not unilateral and it's actually a flowing cycle. And so we'll talk about how to fill in the details, illustrating where the nexus of forests, birds, and people meet. So the first point I want to make about what we're calling bird-friendly forestry is that managing for forest habitat for birds, it doesn't have to be difficult. And it often aligns closely with some of the forestry practices that we're all most familiar with. So why do I say that? Mostly because a little effort goes a long way. Birds have come to rely on the natural disturbance cycles of a forest ecosystem, and forest management is a part of that disturbance regime. The second point of this presentation is to learn what bird species rely on forests and why exactly their presence is a quick and dependable indicator of forest health. And then we'll teach you how to use this information to speak with both foresters and landowners in a way that maximizes forest productivity. So we have records for around 500 species of birds occurring here in North Carolina. Some nest here and some do not. The birds on this slide actually spend their winters here in North Carolina. And still there are other species that just pass through North Carolina during migration. But in every single case, their presence tells you something about where you're standing, whether it be a forested ecosystem or otherwise. Most birds rely on forest at some point during their life cycle. And one of the fun things about birds is their relative predictability, despite their impressive mobility. They have evolved to prefer certain habitat characteristics. So that means that wherever you find them, you can have a pretty good guess about what that habitat is like. Most also exhibit a really cool behavior called site fidelity, which ultimately means that even if they do migrate from the state, they tend to return to the same nest site or tree cavity year after year throughout their entire lifespan. So if you think no one notices if a tree falls in the forest, think again. So how can you use this information to your advantage, and why should we care about birds? Well, we can look at it from a natural resources aspect. Birds are great barometers of ecosystem health and resiliency. And they're also tell a lot about the species composition of that site. Not just birds, but the vegetation part too. So here's another idea that might be new to you. Birds cast a wide net of communication. So we're looking at the socioeconomic aspects of managing for birds as well. And attracting a different and growing audience to the world of forestry is a good thing. So as foresters with birds, you have a colorful and impressive tool to explain forest management to landowners and perhaps recruit new forest land on which to work. For landowners, as our foresters increase their birding skills, you can start to select your forester with a new lens to meet your objectives with timber harvest and beyond. So the fact is that birds provide a very visible quantification of considering forest land as an asset. And a study by the American Forest Foundation found that about 85% of landowners in the South prioritize protecting or improving habitat, but that they find it difficult to find the right professional to help manage for wildlife. So Audubon, North Carolina has trained more than 300 foresters and land managers in the past 5 years through our Foresters for the Birds initiative. I really love to share the names of the foresters who've gone through this training when landowners ask me who they can ask to help them create a bird-friendly forest management plan. People are looking for forest managers who create comprehensive and sustainable forest plans, and birds are a part of that plan. And quite frankly, that means more than just putting up a nest box. So if there's something I've found to be true, working with landowners to advance bird conservation in the last 7 years or so, it's that everyone has a bird story. So don't be afraid to ask them what that story is and use it as a benchmark for future conversation about forest management. Forest management that supports wildlife habitat has always been ranked high on woodland owner surveys, but what we're seeing is an increasingly diverse forest landowner demographic. This picture shows an example of that. I'm a part of a team of women who created a program called Forest Her North Carolina last year. And we thought that we might find some interest from women who wanted to learn more about forest management, since the statistics were showing a near doubling in the percent of female woodland ownership in the last 15 years. In just 1 year, we've had approximately 700 women landowners from across the state and neighboring states show up to these workshops. We couldn't even imagine the level of need that was out there among this demographic. And with them comes the need to think a little bit differently about how we talk about forest management. So are you prepared to meet those diverse objectives? I believe that concepts like Forestry for the Birds is a gateway to learning about how to communicate about ecosystem services and broaden our overall conservation impact when it comes to forest management. So what is the basic message about bird-friendly forestry? It's all about maximizing diversity. We're talking about the compositional diversity across the landscape, the horizontal and vertical structural diversity within a forested stand, and ultimately diversity among species of both flora and fauna. So if we reference historical and natural range of variation research, we can determine that the percentage of each habitat component needed to sustain a species evolved to fill each and every niche of forest succession. So in North Carolina, by and large, we're talking about a landscape dominated by forested ecosystems. Bird species associations to different age classes are very predictable. So you wouldn't find many grasshopper sparrows, for example, in an old hardwood forest. But as we move to the right of this slide, we see that red-eyed vireos, wood thrushes, and black and white warblers prefer that older forests and generally are not found in fields. So if we want to sustain populations of all species historically present, we just need all age classes historically present with relatively the same percent of landscape coverage. And when we consider the ways that we break down that percent coverage, wildlife and birds in particular emerge as a prominent point of reference. So why are birds a point of reference? Why do we consider birds as one of the best tools in our decision support toolbox? Well, I always like to tell foresters, if you're familiar with your bird songs, you can quite literally walk into the forest with your eyes closed and birds will tell you what's there. They can tell you about all the things in this slide and more. No lugging of tape measures or clinometers or prisms, densiometers, all of that. In this case, your ears are your best forest measurement device. Why? Because there's a bird for every niche and they're all singing. And if all the birds relied on the same characteristics to thrive, competition within and among species just wouldn't be sustainable. So with birds, you've got a colorful, visible, and vocal symphony singing these messages to you at any given time that you're walking through the woods. So not only are birds present across the spectrum of forests, birds are a functioning part of the forest ecosystem. There are really so many cool examples of that, and I wish I had all day to tell you about them. You know, there's birds that aerate soil, they help control pests, they disperse seeds. I'll talk about one of the species today. Species I think you're probably all very familiar with, and that's the blue jay. So blue jays are the foresters of our bird world. And I bet many of you are intricately familiar with the art and science and often struggle of growing an oak tree. Well, blue jays have mastered that art. In fact, it's said that their affection for acorns is credited with helping spread oak trees after the last glacial period. And it all stems from the fact that blue jays like and are specially equipped to eat acorns. These data listed on the right here and more are really fascinating, and I won't read through each one of them. But basically, the study shows that as blue jays cache the uneaten acorns, they're very effective at oak regeneration and oak afforestation. So I guess my message here is that what happens in forests not only affect birds, but what happens to birds also affects the forest. So let's reverse our lens for a second, and we'll look instead from how we see birds to how birds see forests. So this is a photo I took in Franklin County, North Carolina, which is located in northern Piedmont between Raleigh and Rocky Mount. And on this tract, they do have active rotational timber harvests in nearby pine stands. And those pine stands are interspersed with hardwood stands that look a lot like this. So how do you think that birds would view this piece of real estate? Well, the answer is that they would like it. For one, it's a welcome refuge in an area of growing urbanization. One of the reasons that foresters and birders do work so well together, in my opinion, is that we're united in the goal of keeping forests forest and avoiding that land use conversion. But the second point about the woodlands shown here is that it contains a maximum structural diversity. It includes everything from leaf litter, grasses, forbs, mid and overstory trees, and plenty of dead wood and debris. So can you mimic these conditions with forest management? You sure can. The extent of our bottomland forests in particular have declined, and so as home to one of the oldest falls cypress known in existence, we here in North Carolina have a responsibility to sustainably manage these systems as well. And so forestry for birds, the concepts are widely applicable in hardwood forests across the state, whether it's uplands or bottomland forests. And as Jake mentioned, this is part of a Woods for Wildlife initiative. This presentation is, and a lot of the work that we do in the Southeast. And one of the goals is to fully integrate longleaf pine management. But we need to consider those bottomland stands that live among and between the pines in the Southeast. And so birds are a way to talk about those bottomlands and light touch forestry operations that could take place in them. And I think that landowners need to know that there are forestry options available to them between choosing to sell timber and choosing not to. So this full life cycle forest productivity is kind of how I see bird-friendly forestry fitting in. And forests like these flooded forests are an asset in more ways than one. And even if the tax offices may see them as wastelands, birds certainly don't. So let's go through a few bird examples. And the birds we'll talk about today can generally be found in stable numbers throughout North Carolina. I'm choosing to talk about common birds for two reasons. We really want to work towards keeping common birds common, and we want you to have an attainable goal. And the second reason I'm choosing common birds to talk about today is because I want each and every one of you online to be able to go outside and actually see these species and practice the concepts we discussed today. And you'll have a greater chance of seeing them if there are more of them. So the orange table will show a key attribute of a bird species and a forest management practice that would support that attribute. The attributes are usually based on the way a bird forages or where it nests, basically to support birds as well as any wildlife. And we consider the components of their preferred habitat, food, water, shelter, and space. So this is the eastern wood pewee. This songbird is in the flycatcher family, and it weighs all of about 1/2 ounce, 7 inches tall. And it's a bird that some birders will fondly refer to as a name sayer because they sing their own name, pewee, but maybe with more of a North Carolina drawl, pewee. Let's listen to their song. They prefer to stay in the forest interior, but as a species of flycatcher, they do need space in the mid to upper canopy to catch insects. So a key attribute for this bird is that they're aerial foragers, and thus maintaining canopy gaps in your stand will be an important practice. Hooded warbler. We saw this guy on our title slide. Fairly easy to recognize, yellow body, black hood, and it's slightly smaller than the wood pewee we were just looking at. And his song sounds a little like tweet, tweet, tweetio. These songbirds tend to stay in the shrub layer of a forest for both foraging and nesting. So try to work around those patches of shrubs and advance regeneration to support the hooded warbler. Northern parula, or parula, some people say. It's also a type of warbler, spectacular coloration, as you can see here. Although you'll rarely see them up close without binoculars. but you can hear their distinctive song in the woods. It's an ascending trill with an abrupt high. So one of the reasons it's difficult to see this little guy is because they hang out in the treetops. They do prefer about 80% canopy cover, so will often be found in the riparian corridors or the wet parts of the forest. And interestingly, research shows that they often choose moss and lichens that hang in the branches of old trees to build their nest. So if you can select trees to retain, even if they're dying, that have Spanish moss in them, the northern parallel will thank you. Pileated woodpecker. Now here's one bird you can see without binoculars for sure. It's our largest eastern woodpecker. These birds are year-round residents of North Carolina, and they weigh a whopping 10 ounces, which is your average can of soda. And they stand a foot to 2 feet tall. They're very large. So they're similar to the presumed extinct ivory-billed woodpecker that dwelled in the bottomland hardwood forests of the South. I bet most of you have heard that sound before. They do serve as forest ambassadors due to their sheer visibility and also to the fact that they tend to provide habitat for many other cavity-dwelling animals, since they're a primary cavity excavator, which means they're the ones that are building the cavities for all the other species. So this bird really presents an opportunity to retain your largest diameter snags in the forest. And, you know, just thinking about the fact that I would be really sad not to see or hear pileateds in our woods, but like our ivory build, we've got to remember that their presence isn't guaranteed. So let's take a break here. You guys have been online for a long time, and I want to stop for a second and just actively think about applying this management for birds. So what if you have a large diameter tree and it's shading out your potential crop trees? Or maybe you're a landowner who particularly likes woodpeckers or owls. Can you create a snag to meet that trifecta of objectives rather than removing the tree? Why not? You can choose to snag your non-target species of timber. One of the practices that I actually prescribe the most on private lands is snag creation, because we have a generally younger age class of trees than we did long ago. And there's just simply not enough snags or standing dead trees across the landscape to support all of the bark foragers and cavity nesters, including bears and other mammals that have evolved to rely on snags. Deadwood is regarded as an indicator of sustainable forest management. And to me, ironically, it's kind of an indicator of life. So if I look across a stand of trees and I see no dead wood, it seems kind of contrived to me, manicured, unnatural. So, you know, as we think about that, I challenge you to work with what you have. You don't always need to wipe the slate clean to grow new trees. Utilizing snags as a management technique mitigates the sudden increase of sunlight that often causes invasive species colonization, but it's usually enough light to promote oak regeneration and doesn't usually generate a lot of stump sprouts or epicormic sprouting. So just play with those ideas the next time that you're out in the woods. So here, Bob, if you could pull up that poll, I'd love to have everybody take a quick poll. Having just previous knowledge and what we've talked about just by now with Benji and myself, I wonder what you think is a bird-friendly method for creating a snag. So the choices are girdle trunk, hack and squirts, top or limb the tree, or all of the above. So go ahead and make your choice. Okay, has everybody made a choice? Okay, that's great. I love seeing that. Yeah, so I think I might have tricked some of you. The answer is all of the above. You know, if you have the means to girdle a tree with a chainsaw, go for it. That's a great method. And, you know, the slower decline of the tree without herbicides included will prolong the benefits that that tree provides. Hack and squirt, sure. Have worked with Benji a number of times on hacking and squirting to create snags for birds. And, you know, even thinking about labor, it ends up being about less than $20 a tree to squirt some triclopyr in there. So all of these methods, you know, topping and limbing, also all of them can be considered as a bird-friendly method for creating a snag. Okay, there we go. We're advancing now. Okay, so let's keep talking about birds. The wood thrush, this bird has been said to sing one of the most beautiful songs of all birds. They have a complex vocal anatomy. It allows them to sing multiple notes and songs at once. And it sounds like they're saying, Iule. They're about 9 inches long. And this bird is a shrub nester, also nests in mid-story, and it prefers large expanses of contiguous hardwood forests. So when recommending forest retention or rotation for the wood thrush, consider a landscape level context when you're choosing those places, and capitalize on riparian corridors and wide forest edges to keep forest coverage of about 70 acres for the species. And let me play their beautiful. So we've largely been talking about structural diversity up until this point, but the compositional diversity is also really, really important to birds. So seasonal mast provision is one way to think about the vegetation composition as it applies to birds. An example of that is the common spice bush that's pictured here. This is the primary diet of migrating thrushes through our area. And because they are produced in the fall with large red waxy berries, it's a great fuel source for migrating birds. And so I always like to say, if you can keep the spice bush, think twice before taking it out of the understory of your forest. It could literally mean the difference between that bird that's eating that food source, making it back to us for another year of spring breeding season. And in terms of seasonality, strive for a forest that supplies both hard and soft mass throughout the year, whether it be grasses that hold seeds through the winter, black haul, spice bush in the fall, juicy raspberries in the spring, blueberries summer. I guarantee you something is going to be eating those. So here's one of my favorites, the yellow-billed cuckoo. Cuckoos are known for their long spotted tails, which you can see most of in this picture. And our native North Carolina species actually has a yellow bill, so yellow-billed cuckoo. It's bigger than you might think. It's 9 to 16 inches tall. And you may have heard of this bird but not know it. They do have a more familiar colloquial name, and that is the rain crow. So yellow-billed cuckoos will often vocalize when there's an impending rainstorm. They have a quiet song, more of a call that I'll play, but it does come through quiet like it would. We're hearing it in the forest. Cuckoos do like an adequate forest cover, but they will often be found in interior gaps. They find a comfortable nest site at 3 to 20 feet off the ground, and they're what's called a leaf gleaner. So they eat the caterpillars off of leaves, and they have been shown to eat the occasional lizard. So that like of theirs indicates their affinity for sunlight. So all of those things put together means that bird-friendly forestry technique would be creating canopy gaps of various sizes for the yellow-billed cuckoo. You know, I always think about how lucky I am to do the job I do, and I've really been blessed to have access to parts of the state that very few people have seen, because I do work on private lands. And so I think, you know, all of us feel a similar way. Foresters, biologists, landowners, we're all really lucky. And so with that luck comes some responsibility, I think. And so I want to take a few minutes to talk about what I call responsibility species, and or species or situations that are special for one reason or another. So we'll start with the prothonotary warbler. This is a wetland obligate nester, needs wetlands nearby. I've been out with foresters in the southeastern coastal plain of North Carolina, and they know this bird well. It's hard to miss. It's lemon yellow. If he flies past you, you probably know it. So here's his song. One of the foresters I work with said to me, I see them all the time. He kind of figured they were a dime a dozen. But here's what he didn't know. The prothonotary warbler is one of our highest priority birds because nearly 20% of its entire global population nests here in the Carolinas. So there's a reason my friend Bruce saw a lot of them. It's because they're about a quarter of their population here in the Carolinas. So if we don't take this responsibility seriously, our state alone could have a dramatic impact on the entire population of the species. It's a really cool bird. We can look at any of those key attributes for management guidance, but I'll point out one thing in particular, and that is the fact that this swamp bird is the eastern US's only cavity nesting warbler. In bottomland forests, interestingly, that often means the knees of bald cypress, like is pictured here. So not only do we want to save those gnarly, misshapen trees for snags, we should actually start to see those knees as assets as well, and not just a pain in our sides, literally. So this species will also accept a nest box, but I do encourage you to always choose what I call nature's nest box. And that's the natural cavities that are out there. Here are a couple more examples of responsibility species that they deserve a special level of consideration, in my opinion, here in North Carolina. So on the left is a family of wood storks. And so wood storks are federally threatened due to their population decline and habitat loss. They're a big bird, about 3 feet tall, wingspan of up to 6 feet across. Wood storks are what we call a colonial nesting water bird. They are forest bird, but they nest in some of those bottomland hardwoods that we have in North Carolina. And what colonial nesting means is essentially that a single tree can mean the difference between a successful or failed nest for many of the population, concentrated in one area, as you can see in that center picture. So it's a reason to not necessarily remove a tree just because it's in the way or easily cleared during an adjacent timber operation. On the top right, we have the Swainson's warbler. Swainson's warblers prefer cane breaks. These thickets of cane grass are declining across the South due to changes in land use, lack of fire, invasive species. But these systems also tend to be hidden in the depths of the flooded forests and often are only accessible by the private land with the landowners that we're speaking with, or by boat, as you see in this picture below. So as land managers and landowners, I think as, you know, looking and finding these special places, we really have a responsibility to arm ourselves with all the knowledge we can so that if we have the good fortune to run across a patch of cane, we know what to look for, or in this case, listen for. So if you planned your management around the cane break, or even better, prescribed management to support the cane break conservation, little details like that will make a big difference for birds. So we've talked about a lot today, and we know that there are various habitat attributes for each species, but we can sum up some of the bird-friendly forestry practices we recommend to support interior hardwood forest birds. For canopy cover on a landscape scale, you know, about 2,500 acres or so, retaining at least 70% canopy closure supports those species that depend on mature forests, while also allowing enough space to recruit some of those early successional species that use pockets in the interior forest. Gap size, research shows that gap sizes of about 1/10 of an acre to 2 acres create conditions to support birds that like to forage in the open areas within a forested tract. So unless you have forested stands of greater than 50 acres, I really wouldn't recommend creating gaps much larger than about 2 acres, unless it resembles more of a shelterwood structure. So remember that 70% of the landscape cover target that we talked about, and plan your entry points for those gaps as intentionally as you can. Number of snags, you know, capitalize on what I call nature's nest boxes. Save the snags and cavity trees that are already present. There are a range of recommendations for snag density. Some research says 4% of the trees in the stand. Some say 10 or more per acre. And when you're choosing when you're choosing to create a snag, do consider the lifespan of the species. So for example, poplars won't last as long as some of our other hardwood species. Snag size, you know, I've seen Carolina chickadees nesting in fence posts, even less than, you know, 7 centimeters in diameter. So if if you are creating a snag, the more cavities and loose bark it can provide, the better. So when you think about what size trees you're willing to create a snag with, you can go as small as 9 inches DBH, but as you might imagine, there are fewer of the large diameter snags in the forest. So their importance is really multiplied. If you have the choice, your best forestry for birds work season is September through March. Practically, as Benji mentioned, fall is an effective time for herbicide application, and especially particularly on woody species. So considering the birds, I will say that we have species of birds who nest nearly at every time of the year here in North Carolina. And our owls and other raptors begin courtship in winter. But in general, we recommend avoiding the months of April through August when our nesting frequency is the highest in the state. Of course, we recognize that's not always possible. So we've already started working to implement a lot of the principles that we talked about today on the land. And so I'm working towards these goals with my Audubon colleagues from Vermont to South Carolina. And there are other organizations and states also choosing to make birds a priority in the forests and elsewhere. So I think that we realize that not only does it make a lot of sense, but it helps to envision regions of aggregated forest and create a dialogue that can be replicated, no matter how defined your birding skills are or your forestry knowledge is. So in summary, birds can tell you a lot about the health and resiliency of your forest. And you don't have to just stick with the birds we discussed today. In fact, I hope you don't. If you have a smartphone, download a birding app, pick a bird, any bird, read about it. What is it like? Can you support it in the forest with your management? Number 2, consider landowner objectives. I've had a number of landowners call me and ask me, who can they talk to about bird-friendly forestry? I would love to have a bigger pool of names I could tell them. So I ask you, are you prepared to meet that demand? But also to maybe use birds as a way to explain your forestry techniques as well. Number 3, the bottom line is that birds thrive in diverse forests, particularly in our eastern hardwood forest. A diverse forest is a healthy forest. So as we increasingly contend with tropical storms that come inland, flooding along our waterways, even air pollution, trees are the answer. Number 4, birds can benefit from forest management and fit into the economic equation. There are a number of cost share programs, including one that I operate internally with Audubon, North Carolina, called the Forest Land Bird Legacy Program. There are options out there to help that fit the economic equation, whether that be timber or a cost share program. I would say, remember that birds and forests are not mutually exclusive. Number 5, the relationship of birds and forest is reciprocal. And, think about the blue jay or the hooded warblers that is eating those caterpillars. They can do their job and we can do ours. Number 6, finally, birds do need our help. The decline in numbers is really surprising, staggering. Just because we see birds every day, and thank goodness we do, but it doesn't mean that they're doing just fine. So, when I was a little girl, I would listen to the birds sing and I'd want to sing back to them just to give back to some of what they give us. Luckily, I found a career that I don't have to sing to get that done. But I'd like to challenge you to think about ways that you can give back to. So thank you. And if you want more information, or if you want to be added to my list of foresters or landowners who are interested in bird-friendly forestry, please do reach out to me. My contact information is there on the slide, or you can find me online. And thanks again to all the photographers that help make a bird presentation beautiful, and they're listed here. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Amy and Benji, for your presentation today. We're going to go through questions. I just want to remind folks that if you have questions and you haven't entered them into the Q&A feature of Zoom yet, please click on that and you can enter your questions there. We do have 12 questions so far in, so let's get started so we can try to get through as many as possible before we end at 2:30 Eastern here. The first question that has come in is related to herbicides, and it says, can you recommend a herbicide that will kill privet but not affect pecan trees?
That's a biologist's favorite question, or not a favorite question, but the favorite answer is it depends on how big are the pecan trees versus how big is the privet. If the privet is small and underneath the trees, you could do a foliar spray with triclopyr on the privet and get some control. If the privet's fairly big and still not in and amongst the pecans, you could do a basal bark and still get good control that way. It's kind of hard to answer that without seeing a picture of what they're asking.
Okay. Next question from Robert Jennings. Can you use vegetable oil for basal bark and cut stumps to be effective?
Yes, you can use methylated seed oil and would still be effective.
Another question from Robert is, does concentrate glyphosate have surfactant in it already?
Most of them do, as I said earlier. If it has a plus or a pro after it, it definitely does, but either ask the sales rep or again, check the label to make sure if it does or does not.
Okay, question from Will, and this goes back to when you were giving percentages for the herbicides. He's wondering, are those percentages for active ingredients or the product?
It is for the amount of product to use.
Okay. Trying to get all the herbicide related ones here to keep them. Okay. And this one is herbicide related, but I think it's directed towards Amy. And it says, Amy, can you connect the use of herbicides and the loss of birds?
Oh, yes, there is some connection for sure. We've come a long way in our use and knowledge of herbicide, as Benji demonstrated today. So I think, you know, unless you're running into a direct conflict, physical conflict, I wouldn't worry too much. Now, there's a different story when it comes to pesticides. As you know, we lost a lot of the top predators years ago, decades ago, before we banned some of those pesticides. And so, you know, as Benji said, just always consider when, where, and how you're applying those things. But in general, I do find that with the right application, herbicides and birds are fine together.
All right, thank you. Question from Barry New. He's wondering, how do you recommend topping and limbing large trees to create snags?
Hey, Barry. You know, with the topping and limbing, there's actually, believe it or not, there's some research out there about different ways to safely do that. I think in the most times I've found that to be a thing is when people accidentally top or limb a tree and they figure it's a loss. And I always want to tell people that it's not. But there are ways to do that. A lot of them involve the, you know, mechanical heavy equipment to do that. And some of our arborists are capable. And there's some specific techniques that I don't know all the details of, but that you can find online with a search. So thanks for asking about that.
Okay, this question's from Anonymous, and they want to know, how wide should the forest soft edge be?
That's a great question. In general, the best place to start with a question like that is to look at what's around it. If you're talking about a field edge, you can generally provide, 30 feet or so, even less, and talk about creating what we call that soft edge, I think you mentioned, where it kind of feathers the height of the vegetation along the way. If you're looking at something like, we look at power line right-of-ways for birds and gas line right-of-ways, and you can actually emphasize creating some more of that early succession within the forest, then we go up to 65 feet wide on either side and support birds like golden wing warbler, which is not in the area we're talking about, but it's just an example of, depending on where you are and what your objectives are, it could be anywhere from 30 to 60 feet wide.
Okay, next question is from John Blythe. Is there a publication or website with the birds that you've listed, as well as and more, that discusses the associated practices as you did in the presentation?
Yes, and there are actually many of them, and they cover a lot of different forest types because we've been working, across the U.S. on this initiative. So I would say two things. You can email me and I can send you the booklet that I usually provide if we were in person, and it talks about these species. And the cool thing about that is you can print it out and take it to talk with your landowners or your foresters. Talks about all that we talked about today and more. You can also just do a Forestry for the Birds Google search and come up with a lot of great material from different states, Vermont, Massachusetts, Maine, Ohio, who's all put together similar type of recommendations and bird species for different forest types. So depending on where you're tuning in from, you may want to do that, or you can just email me.
All right. So Amy and Benji, when you guys get a chance, if you'd enter your contact information in the chat window, that will make it easier for them to capture that. Make sure you set it to panelists and attendees so that they get it. Okay, next question that came in. I've read that girdling may cause a tree to rot from the outside in instead of the preferred inside out. As a result, by the time the rot has progressed far enough for woodpeckers to excavate a cavity, the tree has become fragile and may easily fall in a windstorm. I'm sure the species and age of the tree influences that, but is there any truth to this?
You're right. The species, I think, does matter, and there is truth to that. Absolutely. So, the first thing that I want to point out is that I talked about cavity nesters a lot, but there are also species of birds and bats that like that sloughing bark. And brown creepers actually build their nest behind a piece of bark on trees. So rotting from the outside in is not necessarily a bad thing. Bats roost in trees like that as well. And then you're looking at, you're increasing the insect population from the outside in as well. And so that's a benefit. So you're right, but not necessarily all bad. And species would matter on that.
Okay. Next question is from Debbie Dickinson. Where do I find a list of priority birds for Eastern North Carolina and what their habitat preferences are?
Actually, Benji's organization, NC Wildlife Resource Commission, is great. They produce a wildlife action plan that probably will give you more information than you want to know about birds. And you can find that on their website. I think it's ncwildlife.org. Benji.
It is.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then you can also go to our website, nc.audubon.org, which I'll enter here in a second. And we have set aside what we call important bird areas. And so you can isolate that by region, and then you can find the species that make that area important and where they are. You can actually, it'll tell you where to go see them. So you can use one of those two resources. There are also others out there that I'm happy to go into more detail with if you and I want to chat sometime.
Okay, next question is from Johnny, wondering, would a large yellow poplar girdled with chainsaw be of much help as a cavity tree near water?
Yes, absolutely. You know, poplars, I did mention them as decaying faster than some others, but in a lot of cases, that's a great thing. And poplars are a species that people are willing to create snags out of, and they're nice and straight near water. Anything, any habitat structure created near water for birds is great. So yes, the answer is absolutely.
Okay, this question is from Charlie Davis, and he's wondering, what is your preferred bird app for your phone?
Well, the Audubon app, obviously. No, I also like iBird Ultimate. It gives you a little bit more information on the sounds, the songs, and that's kind of, you know, one of my favorite things. People like Merlin. There are some apps now that you can actually record the sound that you're hearing, and it will try to identify that bird species for you. I will caution they're still working on some of that being perfectly accurate. But anyway, Audubon's good, iBird Ultimate, Merlin, all good apps.
Okay, last question is from Marnay Tichenel. I was wondering, the fantastic graphic on the bird species found in a forest as it goes through succession. It was an early graphic. Is that available somewhere?
Yeah, so I found that online. I love that. You know, every time I use that in a presentation, somebody comments on it. I did it with a simple search in Google. And actually, if you look back at the slides when they're available, I have on my last slide listed the graphic artist for that, but you can do a, you know, forest birds ecosystem Google search and it'll come up.
All right, thank you. Jacob, is there anything you want to say to wrap things up?
No, just thank you again, Benji and Amy, and for everyone for tuning in. I really enjoyed the presentations. And if anyone else has any more questions, I believe all three of our contact information should be on that chat. So write it down, and I'm sure I'd be glad to answer any questions. I'm sure they would be as well.
All right, folks, this is wrapping it up. I just want to remind you, if you are participating and looking for your continuing education credits, you have to complete this process by clicking on step 2. We'd also like, even if you're not doing it for continuing education credits, complete that process and fill out the satisfaction survey for today's webinar. With that, we'll wrap it up and bring it to an end. Thank you all.
Thank you.